On this video, we are celebrating royalty as we're about to see the release of Godzilla vs. Kong. So I figured what better time than to check out the King Kong timeline and find out if the big guy has any sort of continuity or if his timeline is just a bunch of bananas. But before we start the video, if you could just take a second and go down there and click the like button, maybe subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell thing, do whatever other voodoo ritual that YouTube requires nowadays.
His Majesty's reign commenced back in 1933 with King Kong and has been ranked number 43 on the greatest movies of all time from AFI. It starts off with filmmaker Carl Denham on an expedition who is bummed out about having to have a woman in his film. And we're in New York City where he meets Ann Darrow and casts her in his movie without even knowing if she can act. And one thing I've learned from watching horror movies, if someone casts you with no audition or anything,
run.
She meets Jack Driscoll, who also thinks that women are just a bother, and they end up on the notorious Skull Island. The natives there are doing some sort of Bride of Kong ceremony, and Jack makes a confession.
Say, I guess I love you.
Why, Jack, you hate women.
The natives kidnap Anne and offer her to Kong, who makes his first appearance with an amazing stop-motion effect, as well as a puppet head, and these effects are close to 100 years old and are still great. Skull Island has some other surprises like this Stegosaurus, a Brontosaurus that wrecks boats and eats people, this big lizard thing, and a T-Rex that Kong fights and kills. There's also a big snake-like creature and a pterodactyl, and the king seems to have a soft spot for Anne. Jack saves her because why wouldn't you save the only woman that you don't hate, causing the big guy to go ape and almost kill the kid with the best hair of all time.
Can I get away with that look?
To show you just how massive the Kong head puppet was, here's a shot of him eating a guy, and they eventually stop him by gassing him. They take him to New York and put him up on display, but of course, he breaks free, causing chaos and eating people and randomly grabbing people from their beds and throwing them to their deaths. Kong's scale actually changes a bit during the film as he ranges anywhere from 18 feet tall to 24 feet tall, depending upon the shot. He gets Anne and heads to the top of the Empire State Building, and my favorite story is that the stop-motion animators were distraught that every time they touched the Kong model to move it, their fingers would move the fur, which was visible in the film, making it clear that it was a stop-motion model. But the viewers at the time didn't notice, instead thinking that they took the time to make Kong's fur blow in the breeze. An actual mistake was commended as a fantastic special effect detail. Airplanes shoot the big fella, causing him to fall.
Oh, no. It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
There's no visible date here, so we're rolling with real-time 33, judging from the cars and clothing and such. Amazingly, a sequel came out in the very same year with The Son of Kong, and Carl is back, and he says that the first film was a month ago, so we're just a short while after Kong fell, and I guess still in 1933. He's facing lawsuits, so he and Engelhorn from the first film take off to Asia. They travel around as time passes, so you'd have to figure it'd be several months of cruising around, so we're probably into the next year by now, so I guess 34, and they hear about a lost treasure that's on Skull Island, so they decide to head there again. They have a stowaway and a lovely Hilda, and they eventually make it to the island. Once there, they discover a smaller version of Kong, stuck in quicksand, who appears to be lighter in color and only about 12 feet high. They face a Triceratops-looking thing and a monster bear, and with little Kong's help, they find the treasure. There's more dino fights, and there's more comic relief, and bad guy Hellstrom is eaten by a water dino. There's a huge earthquake and storm causing the island to sink, and Little Kong sacrifices his own life to save Carl, and our heroes are saved by a passing ship. Kong went away for close to 30 years and wasn't revived until 1962 with Toho Studios' King Kong vs. Godzilla, the fight to end all giant monster fights and the precursor to the upcoming film. Oddly, it's the third Godzilla movie and technically the third Kong movie. Since I used the Japanese version of the film for my Godzilla timeline, I'm using the US version for this one. And after a group hears of a giant monster in the islands...
Giant monster? He must be putting us on.
This is a universe in which Godzilla has shown up at least twice. Why would they doubt that a giant monster exists?
A crashing nuclear submarine accidentally unleashes Godzilla from the iceberg in which he was trapped in the previous film, and the TV crew guys head to Faro Island. I'm assuming it's Faro Island since Skull Island was destroyed, but it's also pretty likely that this is a separate continuity. It is possible that this is the same universe as the originals, though, especially since people seem to pay no mind to the giant monsters around them and forget about them really easily. Plus, reports of a giant ape from the other side of the world may not have stuck as strongly in early 60s Japan. Faro Island is full of natives, and when I say natives, I mean Japanese actors with embarrassing blackface. They win over the natives by giving them all cigarettes, including the children, because giant monsters aren't enough to worry about. You gotta give them cancer now, too. It's weird because they discuss Godzilla being in suspended animation in the iceberg for millions of years, as if this is the first time that they've seen him, as if the previous film and sightings didn't happen, so I don't know if they were trying to say that this is a different continuity. Kong shows up to fight a giant octopus, and then is drugged and taken off to fight with the Big G. Kong's not necessarily the good guy here, as he does his own fair share of destruction and killing, like all the people in this subway car. And trust me when I say that if you're having a bad day, nothing will cheer you up faster than a giant gorilla strung up by balloons. They have their final fight, and eventually Kong wins out, and in case anyone still believes the old myth about two versions of the ending, I used the Japanese version in my Godzilla video, and Kong won. And this is the American version, and Kong still wins. So there is no other ending out there. There's no date in this one, so it's also in real time, so 1962 then. Since that was a hit, a follow-up was made in 1967 called King Kong Escapes. And the beginning of this film confirms that this Kong is 60 feet tall, quite a bit bigger than his American counterpart, but seemingly smaller than the last film. And oddly, they talk about him as if he's a myth, and no one has ever seen him, so it's possible that this is, yet again, another continuity? But then there's this doctor who created a giant Mechani-Kong that they say is just like the original, so it's clear that people have seen him before, after all. This doctor's name is Doctor Who, so maybe Mechani-Kong is actually bigger on the inside, and they head to Mondo Island because I guess Kong is embarrassed by the blackface guys on Faro, and this guy says...
Bong. That means king.
Wait, so that would make him Bong Kong? I mean, what joke do I even use here? It's just, there's so many.
Kong looks a little less doughy than before and fights Gorosaurus, a creature who, oddly enough, has appeared more in the Godzilla universe than King Kong himself. Kong falls for another human woman, like what does he plan on doing with them? He's a lot nicer than the one from the previous film, and the doctor drugs and kidnaps the big ape. And come on, just look at how lovably ridiculous this ape head is. They hypnotize him, and I just love this suit. Look at how they made the legs all stumpy. They use Kong to help mine Element X, but he breaks free and finally makes it to Tokyo to fight Mechani-Kong. The doc is betrayed and shoots his conspirator, and he's like 3 feet away from her, but I guess misses and grazes her arm? How lousy a shot is this guy? Kong climbs the Tokyo Tower, and the metal monkey falls to his destruction. Kong then stops the Doc's sub and smashes it, killing him. And again, there's no date in this one, so we're calling it real time 67. 9 years later, the first attempt at an American remake happened when 1976's King Kong. And instead of a film crew, we've got an oil expedition led by Beethoven's owner. He says this picture was taken in 1943, and the next one was taken 35 years later, which was 2 weeks ago. So we're set in 1978, apparently, 2 years after the film was released. Odo's on board, as is R.J. McCready. Sorry, that's Starman. They rescue Jessica Lange in her first film, and Cujo's owner is here too.
What are the odds that 2 people on this same boat have St. Bernards?
Jack was born in 1945, so he'd be 33 here, and Jessica survived a shipwreck, and when she wakes up, her makeup and hair are perfectly done. So did the crew do that to her while she was sleeping? They reach the island and for some reason take Dwan with them for some reason, and she totally dresses for the occasion. Hey, we're taking a small team to a completely uncharted island. You better get on your half shirt and Daisy Dukes. Like the original, natives kidnap Dwan and sacrifice her to Kong, who makes his grand entrance. And like the Toho version, this is a guy in a suit. The natives have made this big door for Kong to get through, which they also did in the original, which is kind of silly if they wanted to keep him out. Like, we built this big wall to keep a giant gorilla out, but we also made this giant door so he can get in? Kong and Dwan become fast friends, and she discusses zodiac signs with him, and he gives her a bath, and then blows her dry, which seems to have a certain, effect on her. And some of the effects have suffered with high-def releases, like this shot of Jack in a cave, which clearly shows the outline of the optical. It's a little weird. I mean, Kong pulls Dwan's top down, and I think it's supposed to be a touching moment.
A bad touching moment.
There's a giant snake, and they eventually gas the big guy and take him back to New York, where of course they put him on display in a huge show. He's revealed, kind of oddly, by lifting a giant gas pump off him, and he escapes in like 30 seconds, stomping on people including Fred Wilson, and does all the classic bits like subway destruction and throwing women around, and Dwan has to stop running.
Please, buy me a drink. Buy me a drink over there.
Priorities, lady.
He catches her and climbs the World Trade Towers, a scenario that feels a lot more haunting now as I realize that it's generally strange to see them there in older films, and more so to have them feature so prominently in the events. Helicopters shoot up Kong and he falls, and somehow Dwan, who was at the top of the tower, is suddenly just on ground level and seemingly before the mob of people are, and Jack leaves as Dwan becomes famous. So for some reason, 10 years later, they decided that they needed a sequel. So they made one with 1986's King Kong Lives, which actually starts right at the ending of the last film. It then cuts to 10 years later, so I guess 1988. Sarah Connor is here, and they reveal that Kong has been in a coma since he fell, but he's alive, and it turns out that there's another giant ape, this one with apparent ape boobs, and they use Lady Kong to give the king a blood transfusion, like they have these big, gigantic blood bags and everything. Then, they insert a giant artificial heart, and if that's not hilarious, then I just don't know what the definition of that word is. They remove a giant gorilla heart and replace it with a massive artificial one, and the big boy gets loose and hunts his lady friend, and they make ridiculous goo-goo eyes at each other. The military goes after them and says that they're 50 feet tall, so taller than the original, but shorter than Toho Kong. The apes immediately have marital issues, and Hank and Amy decide to have a little sleeping bag action because why wouldn't you, in the forest, on the run from the military, next to 2 giant apes? Lady is captured again, and Kong is presumed dead, and it bounces ahead several months, as the lieutenant says that he has been watching the ape since last summer. So we're actually into the next year here, so that would make this 1989 then. And Kong's alive, eating alligators that change from babies to full grown, depending on the shot. People often refer to Kong as a monkey because they don't know the rule.
Tails, monkey. No tails, apes.
Then the king just snaps this guy in two and then eats another, and it turns out that Lady is pregnant, so Kong breaks her out. There's a big battle with the army, and baby Kong is born, but King is really shot up and dies. Lady and baby then live happily ever after, I guess. Then, in 2005, almost 20 years later, the franchise got a big restart with Peter Jackson's take on it with King Kong. We're in New York, and it's the Depression, and we meet actress Ann Darrow, played here by Jet Girl, and Carl Denham is back, played by Jack Black, paired with little baby Hanks. And car license plates tell us that it's either 32 or 33. Jack Driscoll is also here, looking Brody-ish, and there's new character Bruce Baxter, who is actually also tied to Godzilla. Various crew members include Billy Elliot and Smeagol, and they finally get to the island at about the 1 hour mark in the movie, something that occurs less than a half hour in the original. Anne is of course kidnapped and offered to Kong, who makes his grand appearance. He's smaller than before, at only about 25 feet tall, and of course there's dinosaurs here and some effects that did not age well. There's T-Rexes, of course, and then prepare yourself for the bug pit scene, which is probably one of the most horrific scenes in a non-horror film that I can think of. There were apparently some other giant apes at one point, judging from these skeletons, and Jack saves Anne, and they capture Kong following the plot of the original film. He's taken back to New York, where of course he manages to break free and wreak havoc, and there's more license plates marked NY32. And here's the thing. A bunch of online sources peg this movie as taking place in 1933, which was the year that the original came out. So it makes sense to set it there. But all of these vehicles and plates had to be created or selected to fit the time period. So it's a bit odd that they chose plates that had NY32 on them, because it's more than one. It's also the end of the year based on the snow. So having some cars expire in 32 and some in 33 makes sense for it to be in 1932 instead of 33. And the plates on the 32 side of it hadn't expired yet. Kong is reunited with Anne and heads up the Empire State Building, and of course battles it out with airplanes in a sequence that really sets off the scared of heights part of me.
I had a really hard time watching this part without getting just a overwhelming feeling of vertigo.
He gets shot up and falls, and the film ends much like the original, only taking double the amount of time to get there.
It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
The jungle was quiet for 12 years, and we got another sort of reboot with 2017's Kong Skull Island, which begins in 1944. As an American and Japanese soldier meet a big ape who's much, much bigger than 25 feet. We then bounce to 1973 in the middle of another war, and fairly close to the time period of the first remake. And we meet agents of Monarch Walter and Dr. Dre. They plan to check out Skull Island with the help of a military team, including Eazy-E and Mace Windu, and Loki's here, as well as Carol Danvers, it's MCU light. And they head to the island and start setting off seismic charges, which clearly pisses off the big boy, who, he eats someone.
Is that a monkey?
We already went over this, dude. There's no tail. So no.
Kong makes short work of the copters, and this Skull Island has some big yaks and monster spiders. And then another MCU member shows up with John C. Reilly as the American soldier from the intro. He's been on the island the whole time, and there's also giant squids involved, and some high-end sashimi action, and interesting note, the actor watching Kong here is the same one that did the motion capture acting for him. Turns out there's things under the island called skull crawlers, and one chomps down on Randa, so Mason and James team up with Kong to get him to help. Just to note, the King is 100 feet tall here, about twice the size of the 76 version, and nearly half the size of the Toho guy, and when Packard goes off the deep end, he wakes up the big one, a giant-size skullcrawler, and Kong smushes him. The movie has a great take on the noble sacrifice guy, and then there's an epic final showdown in which Kong does what you should do to any giant tongue monster. The survivors are rescued, and Marlowe is reunited with his family, and there's a post-credit scene establishing this as being in the same continuity as the 2014 Godzilla film, showing snippets of Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and King Ghidorah.
Or Ghidorah, if you want to be that guy. Don't be that guy.
The Big Ape was back 2 years later in 2019's Godzilla, King of the Monsters, for what basically amounted to a cameo. He's mentioned once or twice in the movie, although he doesn't show up in the end, as all the other monsters bow down. There is a mention of him in the end credits, naming him as Kong, and since this film is set in 2019 as well, it'd be 46 years after his own film, and we get a cave painting showing the two face off. So sadly, even though we don't get to see him in all his glory, the stage is set for the two to face off. And that's coming up very soon with Godzilla vs. Kong. Looks like it's going straight onto HBO Max, but also will be in the theaters. Looks as if King Kong has grown quite a bit and is now fully Godzilla-sized. And I guess you can't go wrong with a trailer featuring a rap rock song that says, "Yeah!" a whole lot. If you're still hungry for Kong, know that there was also a 1998 animated musical version that basically retells the original film, just with a happy ending, called The Mighty Kong. There's another animated feature called Kong, King of Atlantis from 2005 that features some of the cheapest animation you're going to see, as well as Kong Return to the Jungle from 2007. Both of these are follow-ups to Kong the Animated Series, which ran for one season back in 2000. There was also another TV series back in 1966 called The King Kong Show, as well as a 2016 Netflix animated show called Kong, King of the Apes. None of these are tied into the movies and are all their own things. If you have a special spot for the Peter Jackson version, you can go to Universal Studios in Hollywood to catch the King Kong 360 3D ride, in which the King fights some T-Rexes around your tour van. Peter Jackson even shows up in the beginning to tell you when to put the glasses on, so if theme parks are ever open again, maybe go check it out.
So there you have it, 8 movies with, a semblance of continuity within their own respective entries. You have essentially 5 different continuities here. You have the original King Kong and Son of Kong, you have the Japanese versions, you have the Dino De Laurentiis versions, you have the Peter Jackson version, and now you have the new MonsterVerse version. So that's a lot of different Kongs, and each one is their own separate continuity. I suppose there could be a way to work them together into one, but I don't think it would make any sense. So they're definitely different universes and different continuities, and a lot of these are worth watching. Most of these movies are great and enjoyable. The original King Kong is a classic that you must see. It's just a pioneer of stop motion filmmaking and just special effects and just storytelling in general. It's amazing. Son of Kong's a lot of fun. The King Kong vs. Godzilla is actually really entertaining. King Kong Escapes is silly. It is probably one of the clunkers of the bunch. The 76 version was, I thought, pretty damn enjoyable, pretty good. It's a little bit cheesy, but still a lot of fun. King Kong Lives is ridiculously terrible, but really funny to watch. I enjoyed the hell out of it just because of how silly it was. The Peter Jackson version is actually really fun as well, too, if only it was about, an hour and 15 minutes shorter. It's just really long. It's overly long. As an editor, I cut the hell out of that movie. And Skull Island was just really, really entertaining. I'm actually looking forward to Kong versus Godzilla. I think it should be fun, or Godzilla versus Kong, whichever it is. Let me know what you thought of these down below. Please leave some comments, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. And then also, please check out the Patreon page and the patrons over here. These guys are awesome. They help keep these videos going. They help keep this channel alive. You can too by going to patreon.com/movietimelines. I certainly would appreciate that. And until then, thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you very shortly for another great one. Can you put me down now?